Hello, everyone. Thank you all so much for attending or tuning into our 18th episode of the Peaceable Kingdom Hour, which is titled Misconceptions About Satan. My name is Matthew A. King, and I am your host. This live stream is made possible in collaboration with allcreatures.org, leading the way in faith based vegan animal rights since 1998, and with the Christian Animal Rights Association, a non denominational Bible based ministry. All opinions and teachings expressed in this series are the commentaries of me, Matthew A. King. And so today, with the teaching agenda, first I'm going to do the usual disclaimer. Then I'm going to talk about the inspiration for this teaching, and then I'm going to talk about a misconception that mostly about how Satan rules in hell and how that's mostly inspired by Greek mythology. And then I'll talk about other literary inspirations for the misconception, like John Milton and Dante Alighieri. And then I'm going to talk about the misconception of the appearance of Satan and how that was inspired from various sources that were not the Bible. And then I'll talk about what the Bible actually says about Satan, and that'll include Satan as a serpent, how that wasn't always the understanding, that was sort of a retcon. And then the characteristics of Satan, like how he's a fallen angel, the dominion of Satan, the ongoing battle between Jesus and Satan. I'll discuss that. And then what Satan does with his dominion. And then also, where is Satan now? And then with that, Satan's ultimate fate, and then Satan's dominion versus Jesus' dominion and what that means for animals. Most importantly, we'll discuss that. And then I welcome questions and comments at the end too, of course. But and you know, if you want to ask a question in between too, that's totally cool. But the disclaimer I wanted to give too is just because some people that are raised in more of a maybe perhaps strict evangelical circles of churches may feel uncomfortable with this teaching just because it's about Satan and hell. And, you know, a lot of people get a lot of very rigid teaching about it. And it's not as maybe jovial as this subject will be. And so if you feel uncomfortable at any time, feel free to step out. Of course, there's no pressure to keep watching. And but I want to talk about too the inspiration for the subject because I know this is a little bit unusual, just because it's like what is this about animals? But it does eventually lead there. But I was inspired to talk about this subject because my wife and I were up in New York City for vacation in August, and we were watching a Broadway play. First one I ever went to. It's the Book of Mormon, and I'm a South Park fan, and so when I was watching it, it had the usual South Park humor, but then it had this moment where it was showing spooky Mormon hell, and of course it was humorous, just like the rest of the play, but it had like Satan had like a pitchfork and like horns and was dancing all through hell, and like there was like people chained up and he was like torturing them, and I was like, where did this idea come from? Like why do people have this idea? Just because Mormons of course are based on the Bible as well, even though they have some added texts. And so where did they get this idea of Satan? South Park, the creators at least, got this idea of hell, and it's obviously not based on the Bible or Mormon text. And so where do they get this from? And so I wanted to sort of research that and then present it to you as well, just because I thought it was an interesting subject, and it does connect with animals in the end. But the first misconception I wanted to deal with was Satan rules in hell, tormenting poor souls with a pitchfork. And I wanted to sort of address that, like, because that seems to be the most common misconception, and we see that throughout um, popular media. And like, so I prepared this short presentation too, like, like there's like these popular images of what Satan looks like. Like on the left here, we have this image of Satan with horns and this trident and this scowl on his face, and then on the right there is this same thing with the horns and the trident. And so it's a very bizarre, and it's just the popular understanding of Satan. And then there's this one, same thing. He's got a tail here, and he's got the horns and the trident. He's really muscular in this one too. And then this is the South Park version. Actually, this is Kenny. I'm sorry, Stan, Cartman, and Kyle. They're standing in hell, and there's these fire and this flame behind them, and these rocks, and this really foreboding atmosphere. And then Satan's standing there, all muscular, with this skull on his belt and these horns and a beard. And so it's all very cartoonish, of course. And then there's that movie called Legend from 1980. I think that was 1982 that came out, and that has also the same thing here. It's like the horns and the trident, and the red skin. That's also a very common thing. And then this was an unusual presentation too. This is from the movie End of Days with Arnold Schwarzenegger. I really love that movie, and so I wanted to highlight this too. But he almost has like a honeycomb appearance here in this one, so that's a little bit unusual for the other presentations when you juxtapose it. And then this one's from Little Nicky. This is Harvey Keitel. He's got like these mini horns and these elf ears and a beard, of course. And so that's a little bit unusual as well, but still mostly fitting with what people think. And then this one is from, I think it's Bill and Ted's Excellent Journey. That one's the same thing. Satan's almost like he's like this, animal creature, like a bull with horns and really, really disturbing face. So that's pretty typical. And then there's the Great Red Dragon and the Woman Clothed in Sun. This is a famous painting by William Blake from 1803. And this was the inspiration for the movie Red Dragon. He has this. So this is William Blake had this image of Satan drawn on this canvas, and he was depicted as this dragon with a tail and these horns. And then in Red Dragon, he actually gets this tattooed on his back. The villain Francis Dollarhide. It's played by Rafe Fiennes or Rafe Fiennes, and he has that image on his back in the movie. And then the movie Constantine, same thing. Like there's this image of hell, and he's got these tortured souls that are grabbing Constantine and pulling him down, and it's this hellfire. And then also I'll talk about this later, but then the famous image of hell too is this circles of hell, and it's like these different circles with different levels of what people were punished for on their way down, and it's from Dante's Inferno. It's a famous work, and then there's been paintings of that, all throughout. And so that's just kind of what I wanted to address first was the idea, the common ideas that people had about hell. And there's of course nothing wrong with fictional portrayals of hell and Satan, but the problem is these ideas become so prevalent that people think that that's actually what it says in the Bible. And I'm going to address that next week too, like with the Antichrist. I talk about who the Antichrist is, and we have such an idea from fiction and movies and television that it's actually very much a distortion of what the Bible actually says. And so I wanted to make sort of a distinction because the misconceptions have become so popular that people don't even know what the Bible says, or what the original source says. And so the misconception that Satan rules in hell, tormenting poor souls with a pitchfork, that's actually a misconception that's mostly based on Greek mythology, specifically Hades ruling the underworld. And so there's a little bit of a description here of the scholarly understanding, but among these gods, Hades, the Greek god of the underworld, ruled over the dead. As the god of the underworld, Hades typically remained in his realm and does not appear in as many myths as other gods. And so Hades ruled the underworld in Greek mythology. And there's the source for that as well. And then this source, it says, Zeus took the mantle on Mount Olympus and was declared king of the gods. However, the Olympians had to decide who would rule over what realm. So Hades, Poseidon, and Zeus drew lots to determine what domains they ruled. Zeus became the god of the sky, Poseidon became the god of the sea, and Hades became the god of the underworld, an unseen realm where human souls go after death. And then the earth remained with the primordial goddess Gaia. Hades took the rule quite well. He resided in his kingdom and rarely left. And Gaia, that's actually a philosophy that's understood today, like among a lot of pagans, is that Gaia is this sort of idea that Mother Earth needs taken care of, and that everyone that is on Mother Earth needs to take care of her. And so that's also derived from Greek mythology. And then Hades, most importantly, this idea that Hades rules hell or the underworld and that Zeus rules the sky, that's sort of been imported into Christian understanding too, is because a lot of Christians think that, well, God is like Zeus and has this domain over heaven, which is mostly true. But then they have this idea that Hades rules over the underworld, which then got translated into Satan ruling over the underworld or ruling over hell. So where this idea comes from is a lot of it's just Greek mythology, and our society is heavily influenced by Greco-Roman ideas. A lot of the things that we say, like a lot of like medical, I'm a nurse, and so a lot of medical understanding has to do with Greek culture, like a lot of words derived from Greek, like because they were so influential in medicine and politics, and so naturally it became very accustomed to European ideas and sentiments, and then that got obviously transported to the United States, and then it proliferated, and then also the world became colonized by European ideas, and so naturally Greek mythology and Greek ideas heavily infiltrated Christianity. And so it says here, while he was heavily feared, Hades was more altruistic in nature than most ancient Greeks realized. He defended the rights of the dead and focused his attention on his domain only. The god of the underworld strictly forbade any soul from leaving his dominion. His anger and wrath would come out when anyone attempted to leave or when someone tried to steal souls. And so that's also this idea that we get too. That's obviously where that came from, is that Satan's wrath came and he was torturing people that were down. But like Hades, actually, from what the Greek mythology says, Hades would get angry if anyone tried to leave hell or underworld, and then, or if someone tried to steal someone from there, he would get angry. And so he ruled his realm of the underworld. Hades spent much of his time punishing and torturing the two figures. Or I'm sorry, I skipped this one. Oh yeah, it says when anyone attempted to leave or when someone tried to steal souls, Hades spent much of his time punishing and torturing the two figures for their sins of attempting to bring souls back to the living realm. And so if someone was trying to steal someone from hell, Hades would torture them. And this is the idea that we get from Satan torturing people with chains. In addition to being the god of the underworld, Greeks saw Hades as the god of hidden wealth. I thought this was interesting. This reputation likely came due to the fact that precious metals and gems came from the earth below. Not surprisingly, the name Pluton would eventually evolve into his Roman name. And so Greco-Roman mythology sort of has an overlap. And his name in Rome was Pluto. And so Hades was usually shown as a bearded regal god. And to reflect his nature, artists often portrayed him as solemn and mournful. Later works added a unique weapon, presumably crafted by Hephaestus, a bident. It was similar to the three-pronged trident of Poseidon. However, it only featured two prongs. And so that's another thing I wanted to address too, is that, we have this idea that Satan has this pitchfork and that he goes around torturing people in hell. And, that's not something from the Bible. That was something that was obviously created by artists. But yeah, in later works, he was identified as having a bident, and it was analogous to how Poseidon had a trident and he was rolling over heaven. Well, then Hades had a bident and he was rolling over the underworld. And like it says here, some scholars believe that it inspired the pitchfork shown in modern Christian depictions of the devil. Sometimes the bident was a simple scepter. And then this source, there's a source there too if you'd like. It's GreekGodsandGoddesses.net. And then it says, one of the most dreaded and fearsome deities that Greek mythology had to offer, Hades, was the king of the underworld, also called Hades. So Hades ruled over Hades, and so it's kind of confusing. But Hades was known as the ruler. Hades was known as the ruler of the dead. And so Hades ruled over Hades of the underworld. And it's reasonable that this idea of Hades ruling over the underworld got imported into Christianity, and that became Satan ruling over hell, because Hades is actually, the place is actually mentioned in the Bible. And so it's reasonable that Satan became the fill-in for Hades ruling the underworld. And so there's several verses here, like Acts 2:27, it says, "For you will not forsake me and abandon my soul to Hades, the realm of the dead, nor let your Holy One undergo decay after death." And so here it's obvious that, in order to try to get probably Greek converts to understand the idea of the underworld, they probably just used Hades, the word Hades, to describe the realm of the dead, because that was the word that they were familiar with. And so there was a little bit of crossover with that between Christianity and sort of the Greek mythology that they understood. And then also Acts 2:31, he foresaw and spoke prophetically of the resurrection of Christ, the Messiah, the anointed, that he was not abandoned in death to Hades, the realm of the dead. So again, that word was used. And also Revelation 20:13, it says, "And the sea gave up the dead who were in it, and death and Hades, the realm of the dead, surrendered the dead who were in them, and they were judged and sentenced, every one according to their deeds." And Revelation 6:8, "So I looked, and behold, an ashen horse, like a corpse, representing death and pestilence, and its rider's name was Death, and Hades, the realm of the dead." And so that's always associated with the realm of the dead. In Revelation 1:18, "I died, but I see I am alive forever and have the keys of absolute control and victory over death and of Hades, the realm of the dead." And so that's Jesus saying basically that he has control over death and the grave, the realm of the dead. And then just a couple more verses too, like in Luke 16:23, "In Hades, the realm of the dead, being in torment, he looked up and saw Abraham far away and Lazarus in his bosom, paradise." And so here it actually makes a distinction, and this is where it gets kind of confusing, is it calls the bosom of Abraham, which is known as paradise or heaven, And then the realm of the dead, it says the realm of the dead being in torment, Hades. And so people naturally had this idea that it was a place of torment that Satan would rule over. But it's also too that I think that's just being hyperbolic. He's just describing the realm of the dead being in torment. He's not actually describing torment. It's just a it's not a factual representation. It's more of poetry. There we go. But it's poetic more than actually a real descriptor. And then same thing with Matthew 11:23. You will descend to Hades, the realm of the dead. For if the miracles done in you had been done in Sodom, it would remain until this day. And so there again, the realm of the dead. And then Matthew 16:18. And I say to you that you are Peter, and on this rock I will build my church, and the gates of Hades or death will not overpower it. And so Hades is always represented in the Bible as sort of the dead or the realm of the dead. It's just the grave, really, is what it means. And then this description says it well. This is from a BibleHub.com. It says Hades, that which is out of sight, a Greek word used to denote the state or place of the dead. All the dead alike go into this place. The element of truth in theory of the provisional character of Hades lies in this, that the New Testament never employs it in connection with the final state of punishment as subsequent to the last judgment. And so what they're saying is that Hades is mentioned in the Bible, but it's always the grave. It's never mentioned as hell or the place of torment or the place of eternal punishment. Those two things are very distinct. Like Hades and hell should never be considered the same thing. Hades is the place of the dead, or where the dead lie, whereas hell is the place of eternal torment. And so also conclusion is that Satan does not rule hell with a pitchfork. That's something that we can determine, from a biblical worldview. That comes from Greek mythology. Hades ruling Hades with a bident is not from the Bible. And then there's also a misconception that Satan is in charge of hell and that he and his demons, this is actually from a source that says there's a common misconception that Satan is in charge of hell and that he and his demons live there and use their pitchforks to torment souls for eternity. And so where does that idea that Satan is the master of hell come from, if not from the Bible? Much of the false thinking may come from Dante Alighieri's The Divine Comedy and John Milton's Paradise Lost. And so I'm going to go over that as well. Many other works of art and literary pieces, such as Dan Brown's novel Inferno, follow Dante's lead and picture Satan as the one in charge of hell. And so there's also these literary sources that I'll talk about too, where people get this idea. And then I'm going to talk next about Dante Alighieri. He was born in 1265 and died in 1321. But he's widely known mononymously as Dante. He was an Italian poet, a writer, and a philosopher. His depictions of hell, purgatory, and heaven provided inspiration for the larger body of Western art and literature. And then everybody knows this part. Dan Brown actually wrote a novel that was inspired by this, but Dante's Inferno is the first part of Dante Alighieri's epic poem known as the Divine Comedy, where he himself, alongside the poet Virgil, provides a thorough guide through the biblical depiction of hell. They must first venture through the realm of sinners, hell, called the Inferno. Before discussing Satan, it's worth stepping back and understanding where and why he resides in hell's deepest circle. When Dante proceeds to the ninth circle of hell, he learns that instead of the fiery pit that encompassed the other circles, it is instead a vast frozen lake known as Cocytus, with massive gusts of wind plaguing the land. And so it's funny too, because we have this idea of Satan ruling over hell, and even Dante, he depicted the 9 circles of hell. And then the 9th circle was actually frozen. And so this idea that Satan has this rule over this fiery place is not even true based on Dante Alighieri's work. Virgil also informs Dante that the circle itself is divided into 4 smaller rings, and each of increasingly worse forms of treachery. In Cana, the first ring of the 9th circle, Dante meets those who betrayed their kin, whose punishment is to stand frozen up to their chest or necks in the lake's ice. In the 2nd ring, Antenora, those who betray their country, stand frozen to their heads. And in the 3rd ring, Ptolemaea, for those who betray their guests, lay eternally on their backs in the lake, their frozen tears covering their eyes. It's when the 2 reach the 4th ring, Judeca, for the lowest form of betrayal, treachery against one's benefactors, that Dante comes face to face with Satan. And so this fictional work is even not very accurate to people's misconceptions. And then this source says, in Dante's Inferno, Satan is portrayed as a giant demon, frozen up to his waist in ice at the center of hell. Satan has three faces and a pair of bat-like wings affixed under each chin. And so there again is this sort of fanciful understanding of Satan. As Satan beats his wings, he creates a cold wind that continues to freeze the ice surrounding him and the other sinners in the ninth circle. The winds he creates are felt throughout the other circles of hell. Dante's poem describes the brutal descent of sinners into the underworld. Dante journeys through different levels of hell and purgatory and eventually arrives in paradise. The poem itself was an amalgamation of myths, Catholic ideas like purgatory, like in Islamic traditions about Muhammad's night of ascension. Dante's medieval view of hell is influenced more by the Quran than the Bible. And so Dante's literary vision of hell is depicted by Botticelli in his painting Map of Hell as a subterranean funnel of suffering, a wretched underground landscape of fire, brimstone, sewage, and monsters, with Satan himself waiting at its core. It's all very disturbing and effective as a work of art, but is based on the imaginations of men, not the word of God. And so that's something important also, too, is that Dante Alighieri had a very distinctive view of hell. And then that, of course, influenced a lot of paintings throughout church history. And so then people get this idea of hell from the paintings that were not really influenced by the Bible, but was influenced by artist depictions of what expanded upon the Bible. And then I had a couple comments came through. Jonathan said, "Greetings from New York, Matthew. Looking forward to the class. Thank you so much. Always great to have you." And then Tanya said, "Satan is the most beautiful, which makes it easier to deceive us." Yeah, good point. Absolutely good point. And she also said Dante's Inferno in the Chronicles of Narnia, which is fiction based on some biblical scriptures as well. They do have the Iceland there too. That's a good point. Yeah, like that was the what is it? The White Witch. She has a big part of the winter. Yeah, the winter part. That's a very good point. And then moving on from there, I also want to talk about Milton's Paradise Lost. That was another big influence to why people have this misconception about Satan. And who was John Milton? John Milton was born 1608 and lived into 1674. He was an English poet, a polemicist, and a civil servant. His 1667 epic poem, Paradise Lost, written in blank verse and including 12 books, was written in a time of immense religious flux and political upheaval. It addressed the fall of man, including the temptation of Adam and Eve by the fallen angel Satan and God's expulsion of them from the Garden of Eden. Paradise Lost elevated Milton's reputation as one of history's greatest poets. And I've actually never read Paradise Lost, but I know how influential it is. And so I kind of give just a summary here, but Paradise Lost is actually pretty, it's very much inspired by the Bible, and you'll see that. Like it says, Paradise Lost is an epic poem written by John Milton in 1667. Milton was a poet and a historian who is considered one of the greatest English writers in history. He was an opponent of the Church of England and advocated for the removal of Charles I from the throne. Throughout his life, he opposed state-sanctioned religion and supported religious tolerance. His most famous poem, Paradise Lost, is an epic, a type of poem that deals with great deeds performed by larger-than-life heroes. The work is written in blank verse, meaning it does not have a rhyming structure. Paradise Lost recounts Satan's fall from grace and the eventual expulsion of Adam and Eve from the Garden of Eden. Satan was an angel who rebelled against God and was banished to hell, a world beyond earth and the furthest point from heaven. After the fall, Satan and other angels construct the city of Pandemonium as their capital of hell. And so that's probably where that word comes from, is like someone will say like, oh, it was absolute pandemonium to describe chaos. That was the capital of hell in Paradise Lost. Debating what to do next, Satan offers to corrupt the newly created earth. After traveling through the abyss between hell and earth, he finally reaches his destination and enters Eden. And so as you can see, this is all very much based on the Bible, even though it's sort of like what Christians would consider historical fiction. Disguised as a serpent, Satan tempts Eve and Adam to eat the fruit from the tree of knowledge. Believing he has won, Satan returns to hell to boast to the other fallen angels, but they all soon become snakes. Back on earth, Adam and Eve beg for forgiveness, and Adam is shown that humanity will fall because of their act. But the archangel Michael tells him that eventually the King Messiah will save humanity once more. Cast out of Eden, Adam and Eve nevertheless maintain a relationship with God. Despite his role as an instigator of conflict in Paradise Lost, Satan is often regarded as an anti-hero in the poem. So that's an interesting, he's not truly villainous within John Milton's Paradise Lost. And then that's the source there for it. And this one also gave a little bit of a distinction. It says, this source, it says, Milton's story has two narrative arcs, one about Satan, or Lucifer, and the other about Adam and Eve. It begins after Satan and the other fallen angels have been defeated and banished to hell, or as it is also called in the poem, Tartarus. In Pandemonium, the capital city of hell, Satan employs his rhetorical skill to organize his followers, and then he's aided by Mammon and Beelzebub, Belial, Chemosh, and Moloch are also present. And so these are also all these sort of evil figures within the Bible. Milton uses that and uses them as characters that actually assist Satan, even though the Bible doesn't say that. At the end of the debate, Satan volunteers to corrupt the newly created earth and God's new and most favored creation, mankind. After an arduous traversal of the chaos outside hell, he enters God's new material world and later the Garden of Eden. At several points in the poem, an angelic war over heaven is recounted from different perspectives. Satan's rebellion follows the epic convention of large-scale warfare. The battles between the faithful angels and Satan's forces take place over 3 days. At the final battle, the Son of God single-handedly defeats the entire legion of angelic rebels and banishes them from heaven. Following this purge, God creates the world, culminating his creation of Adam and Eve. And then while God gave Adam and Eve total freedom and power to rule over all creation, he gave them one explicit command, not to eat from the tree of the knowledge of good and evil on the penalty of death. And so obviously that's very much inspired by the Bible. And then Satan, disguised in the form of a serpent, successfully tempts Eve to eat from the tree by preying on her vanity and tricking her with rhetoric. Meanwhile, Satan returns triumphantly to hell amid the praise of his fellow fallen angels. He tells them about how their scheme worked, and mankind has fallen, giving them complete dominion over paradise. So that's an important thing I'll address too, is that Satan has dominion over paradise, or dominion over the earth. As he finishes his speech, however, the fallen angels around him become hideous snakes, and soon enough Satan himself turns into a snake. Deprived of limbs and unable to talk, thus they share the same punishment, as they shared the same guilt. Eve appeals to Adam for reconciliation of their actions. Her encouragement enables them to approach God and plead for forgiveness. In a vision shown to him by the archangel Michael, Adam witnesses everything that will happen to mankind until the great flood. Adam is very upset by this vision of the future, so Michael also tells him about mankind's potential redemption from original sin through Jesus Christ, whom Michael calls King Messiah. And so the conclusion is Paradise Lost is a little more accurate in its depiction of Satan, but not hell. And so it actually, Paradise Lost seems to combine all of these ideas sort of into one narrative. Like, he obviously has the idea of Satan and Jesus battling, or there's this angelic battle in heaven. And then right after that is where he deceives Adam and Eve. And so it's sort of out of order in the biblical understanding, but it combines all of these ideas into a narrative that's very interesting, I think, too. It'd probably be something interesting to read. Not something I learned in school, but interesting nonetheless. And so then also the idea, where did the horns come from? Like, we have this idea that Satan had horns, and it's a very bizarre idea too. And you would think it's from the Bible because it's so prevalent, but it's actually not. And so, like, Satan is often shown in popular depictions with horns on its head, furry legs, and cloven hooves of a goat. But why is the devil depicted with horns and hooves? And so Satan, he was identified with the serpent or the snake in the Garden of Eden who persuaded Eve to eat the fruit of the tree of knowledge of good and evil, but there's no mention of his horns and hooves anywhere in the Bible. And for the most part, the goat-like depiction doesn't show up in medieval or even Renaissance images of the devil. But by the 19th century, the idea of a horned devil with cloven hooves was firmly established. Early depictions of the devil don't show him with horns and hooves. For instance, the devil was a blue angel in a 6th century mosaic at the Basilica of Sant'Apollinare Nuovo in Ravenna, Italy. Later, he's identified as the beast, and he's often portrayed as a dragon. And that comes from the book of Revelation, actually. I'll talk about that. But a 15th century painting of St. Augustine, or maybe St. Wolfgang, confronting the devil depicts him as a dragon-like creature with bat-like wings. And that's a pretty reasonable one, too, because that's from the book of Revelation, where he's described as the great dragon. And then a big influence is Pan. In Greek mythology, Pan was the god of the wild, shepherds and flocks, and he was usually shown in the form of a fawn or a satyr with the hind legs, hooves, and horns. Early Christian writers labeled Pan as a demon in their quest to persuade people to forsake polytheism in favor of the newer religion. So you can see how that happened, is that Pan eventually became associated with Satan because um, the missionaries were trying to convince people to drop polytheism in favor of Christianity, and so the ideas that they had of Pan eventually became this idea of him being Satan or satanic. And his classification as just another demon doesn't explain why the foremost of demons, Satan, looks like a satyr. Some historians suggest that age-old associations of goats with the underworld accounts for modern depictions of the devil with a goat's horn and hooves. For example, the demon Azazel, who I talked about in earlier teachings, may be linked in Jewish legend to the ritual of scapegoating, in which a goat cursed with the sins of the Jewish people was sent out into the wilderness on Yom Kippur, the Day of Atonement. And then this gentleman actually narrowed it down pretty well. He says, in a 2013 study in the journal Numen, Hebrew University historian Alexander Kulik argued that the portrayal of the devil with horns and hooves originated in early Jewish literature and can be seen in the Greek Apocalypse of Baruch, a text written in Greek between the fall of Jerusalem in AD 70 and the 3rd century. The text described a demonic race with the hindquarters of donkeys, claiming they constructed the lowest levels of the Tower of Babel. And Kulik argues this passage shows the notion of satyr-like demons existing in Jewish thought at the time. That description, Kulik argues, might have influenced later Christian portrayals of the devil as a satyr, possibly through Christian authors who studied Jewish texts like the 5th century scholar St. Jerome. And then Ronald Hutton, a historian at the University of Bristol in the UK, however, suggested that horned devil depictions originate much later than that. He argued that the devil became associated with Pan only 2 centuries ago during a neo-pagan revival in Europe that sought to challenge the predominant Christian beliefs. And so there was a different perspective as well. And then let me look at the comments here too. It says, Tanya said, reading Genesis closely, I never seen where Adam was, or it was Eve was kicked out of Eden, just him, Adam. Google AI, all sources say they, but not the actual scripture. Interesting. Yeah, it's sort of implied, I guess. It's like they were casted out of Eden, and then there was a cherubim that was set to, deter them from coming back to Eden. And this unknown person says the devil probably looks like Channing Tatum. It says he will laugh and be like him. He did this to us. I'm not sure what you're referencing, but hey, it's funny regardless. And then it says, I think the horns and the hooves are because how the Bible talks about separating the goats from the sheep. Yeah, that's a possibility too. That's definitely great. And Jonathan, good point. Thank you very much. Thank you very much. And then going off from there, it says the movement included a literary cult of Pan that united a romantic view of nature with the ancient Greek god. And this has led to the modern identification of Pan with the devil. The transition to a staple modern image of goat horns and feet and goatee beard is 19th century and does seem to derive from the contemporary literary and artistic cult of Pan as god of the increasingly valued countryside. And that's from a source from Live Science. And like Tanya said too, it might be that Jesus talks about separating the goats from the sheep, and the sheep are always his followers, and so the goats naturally are this sort of evil understanding. And that was probably because too sheep are usually like very docile, and whereas goats are sort of capricious or sometimes mischievous, and so it naturally got associated with sort of bad behavior, and so naturally it became sort of associated with goats became associated with demonic activity. So you can see sort of where that came from. But then, sort of most importantly, we're going to talk about how does the Bible actually describe Satan. And that's something that's important because it's something that actually a lot of people don't really understand. And I'm going to talk about this next week with the Antichrist as well. How there's just a lot of misconceptions and people don't actually really understand what the Bible says about both Satan and the Antichrist. And so like Genesis 3:1-6, it says, now the serpent was more crafty than any of the wild animals the Lord God had made. He said to the woman, did God really say you must not eat from any tree in the garden? The woman said to the serpent, we may eat fruit from the trees in the garden, but God did say, you must not eat fruit from the tree that is in the middle of the garden, and you must not touch it, or you will die. And the serpent said, you will not certainly die. The serpent said to the woman, for God knows that when you eat from it, your eyes will be opened, and you will be like God, knowing good and evil. And the important part of this that I want to highlight too, it says, you will not certainly die. The serpent said to the woman. Notice how it doesn't say Satan, it says the serpent. When the woman saw the tree, or the fruit of the tree was good for food and pleasing to the eye, and also desirable for gaining wisdom, she took some and ate it. She also gave some to her husband who was with her, and he ate. And so this is the earliest understanding. This is where the fall happens, or God tells Adam and Eve not to eat from the fruit of the tree of the Garden of Eden, of the Garden of Good and Evil, of the tree of good and evil, and then the serpent comes along and tricks them or deceives Eve. And so the idea that that was Satan actually is actually said within Revelation. It doesn't actually say that at the very beginning. And so it's interesting because the author of Genesis makes it out like it's just a basic snake or a basic serpent or a talking serpent, we'll say, sort of a magical snake. And then the author of Revelation actually says the great dragon was hurled down, that ancient serpent called the devil or Satan, who leads the whole world astray. He was hurled to the earth and his angels with him. And so this is actually describing the book of Revelation actually says that that serpent in Genesis was actually Satan, because it says who leads the whole world astray, meaning because of the fall. And then also the great dragon, he's called the ancient serpent or Satan. And so that serpent in the garden is being referenced, and he is actually declared as Satan. And then Revelation 20:2, it says, he seized the dragon, that ancient serpent who is the devil or Satan, and bound him for 1,000 years. And so the dragon or the ancient serpent is Satan in Genesis. And so the conclusion we can make from that, from the Christian perspective, is Satan was the serpent that deceived Eve and made Adam sin. And so that's the earliest understanding. And it actually even says this in New Testament works. It says, 2 Corinthians 11:3, but I am afraid that just as Eve was deceived by the serpent's cunning, your minds may somehow be led astray from your sincere and pure devotion to Christ. And so what I wanted to highlight too is that the serpent in the Garden of Eden was not always understood to be Satan. That was actually what we call a retcon, or a retroactive continuity. It means that something was not originally something, but then a later work went back and identified that as Satan and then made it out like that was the case all along. But that wasn't always the Christian understanding, or I should say the Jewish understanding. Like this source, it says, for Adam and Eve, the serpent in the Garden of Eden represented the voice of temptation. But it needs to be noted that for the original writer, the Yahwist or J source, the serpent, this means the original writer, the serpent was not equated with Satan or the devil. The concept of Satan developed only later. And this was the first mention of Satan is actually in 300 BC, whereas Genesis was written sometime in the 7th century BC or 700 BC. So it wasn't until really 400 years later that Satan was even mentioned by name. We find him first equated with the Eden serpent in the apocryphal book of Wisdom. So in Wisdom 2:24, that's an apocryphal, which is considered a non-canon text of the Bible, but it was written around the same time. It says in Wisdom 2:24, but through the devil's envy, death entered the world. And so Satan got portrayed as that serpent in the book of Wisdom. And then that later influenced the writers of Revelation, or writer of Revelation. And then this source also mentions the same thing. We may compare Revelation 12:9, 20:2, where we read of that ancient serpent who is called the devil and Satan. And like I've mentioned too, 1 Chronicles 21:1, Satan wanted to bring trouble on the people of Israel, so he made David decide to take a census. So that's the very first mention of Satan in the Bible, is 1 Chronicles 21:1. And then also, but there's other perspectives too within Jewish literature. Like it says, less well known is the fact that the serpent is equated in 1 Enoch 69:6 with Gadarel, one of the wicked angels who descended from heaven to have sex with women on the earth. And that's elaborated on in Genesis 6:1-4. And so it was thought that Gadarel was a wicked angel. That was thought to be the serpent as well, but obviously it was not canonized. And then Genesis 3:1, however, refers to the Eden serpent as one of Yahweh's earthly creatures, a beast of the field. It is certainly the case that is the ancestor of later ordinary serpents known to humanity. But in its original precursor state, the serpent not only has the capacity to speak, but also to have supernormal knowledge, which makes it more than an ordinary serpent at that point, a kind of magical animal. And so this author tries to study exactly why the serpent is looked at as this malevolent creature. And it says, turning to the ancient Near Eastern background, it should be noted that a few scholars have tried to see the Eden serpent as a symbol or symbolic of Canaanite religion, because the Canaanites and the Israelites were enemies. And so they understood that as symbolic of Canaanite religion. So like this scholar, it says, F.F. Vidberg saw it as symbolic of the god Baal, a view recently adopted by B.T. Arnold. Baal was never symbolized by a serpent in Canaanite religion or anywhere else in the Old Testament. Indeed, it was Baal who defeated the sea serpent Leviathan in Canaanite mythology. And it says, Francesca Stavrakopoulos claimed that the serpent symbolized snake worship, She seems to be thinking of the bronze serpent Nehushtan, and that was obviously a pagan god. Moreover, Genesis 3 does not speak of worship of the serpent. And then also, more generally, Jake Coppens and J.A. Sagan saw the serpent as symbolic of the Canaanite fertility cult. It is true that there is evidence suggesting that the serpent could symbolize fertility in Canaanite religion, but there is no particular reason to find that here. The knowledge of good and evil which the serpent tempts the first humans to acquire is quite unrelated to the fertility cult. And so that was sort of dismissed, but I thought it was interesting to bring that up because it's like, we as Christians, or people of Christian understanding, were believe that the serpent was Satan all along, but that actually wasn't written by the writer, and it was actually different theories about who that actually was. And so that's why I thought it was interesting to include that, was that it wasn't always understood as Satan. It was sort of an interpretation before Revelation got canonized. And so I also want to talk about the characteristics of Satan in the Bible, because that's very important to discuss, is because we really don't know what Satan is like if you just have a lay understanding from popular media. Like in Matthew 16:23, it says, Jesus turned to Peter and said, "Get away from me, Satan. You are a dangerous trap to me. You are seeing things merely from a human point of view, not from God's." And so Matthew 16:23 is interesting because a lot of people wonder about, was Satan actually possessing Peter at that moment? And I don't think necessarily. I think Jesus maybe was telling Peter that he's acting like Satan, because Satan here, it says, "Get away from me, Satan," meaning like you're acting like Satan, because Satan, it says, you are seeing things merely from a human point of view and not from God's. And so when we act anthropocentrically, or we see things only from a human perspective, and so I would say, for instance, secular humanism, which is a popular philosophy, it's that would actually be seeing things from Satan's point of view, which is sort of what the Bible declares, when we see things only from a human perspective. And then this is a pretty famous verse that also describes Satan. It says, "For you," John 8:44, "For you are the children of your father the devil, and you love to do the evil things he does. He was a murderer from the beginning. He has always hated the truth because there is no truth in him. When he lies, it is consistent with his character, for he is a liar and the father of lies." And so there it's pretty condemning of Satan, saying basically that he was a murderer from the beginning, meaning he brought death into the world through Adam and Eve, what he did. And then it says he always hated the truth because there is no truth in him. And so when we reject truth, or when we dislike truth, or it also says when he lies, he's a liar and the father of lies, because he told the first lie. He's the father of lies. And so when we murder, when humans murder or lie or hate the truth, that's actually associated with Satan. So we can see that Satan is a murderer and a liar, and he hates the truth. And then Acts 13:10, then he said, "You, the son of the devil, full of every sort of deceit and fraud, are enemy of all that is good. Will you never stop perverting the true ways of the Lord?" And with this one, Satan is considered deceitful and fraudful, and an enemy of all that is good. And he perverts the true ways of the Lord. 1 Timothy 1:20 likewise says, Hymenaeus and Alexander are two examples. And so these people in the church, and Paul says, "I threw them out and handed them over to Satan so they might learn not to blaspheme God." And so here Satan is said to have blasphemed God, or spoke negatively about God. And then 1 Peter 5:8, it says, "Stay alert, watch out for your great enemy, the devil. He prowls around like a roaring lion looking for someone to devour." And it's interesting, too. There's a horror movie called Devour with Jensen Ackles from Supernatural. He's a pretty famous actor now, but he was in this movie called Devour. It was a horror movie, and it was all about Satan basically possessing people. And at the very beginning of the movie called Devour, it says, it actually quotes 1 Peter 5:8. So that was a big inspiration for the movie. And then 1 Timothy 3:6, "He must not be a new convert, or he might become conceited and incur the same condemnation as the devil." And so Satan here is described as being conceited. And it's important to note that too, because how many humans do you know that are conceited, fraudful, deceitful, reject the truth, enjoy their lies? That's sort of the Bible goes a long way in saying that's the domain of Satan, not God. And then another important thing that the Bible says is that Satan is a fallen angel. And so a fallen angel in both a Christian and Islamic understanding is an angel who rebelled against God and was exiled from heaven. And there's the source for that too. And it even says this in the Bible too, like 2 Corinthians 11:4. "But I am not surprised. Even Satan disguises himself as an angel of light." And so Satan was I'm sorry, Satan is from the Christian perspective, and a fallen angel. And it even says this in Isaiah 14:12-15. This is describing Satan. And this is actually in a very popular reggae song. I can't remember the name of the song or the artist, but he says, Lucifer, son of the morning. And it was obviously inspired by Isaiah 14. It says, how you are fallen from heaven, O shining star, son of the morning. And so Satan is known as the morning star. You have been thrown down to the earth, you who destroyed the nations of the world. And so Satan destroyed the nations of the world through Adam and Eve with what he did by deceiving Eve and making Adam sin. And so he was thrown down to the earth, meaning he fell from heaven. For you said to yourself, I will ascend to heaven and set my throne above God's stars. I will preside on the mountain of the gods far away in the north. I will climb to the highest heavens and be like the Most High. But you will be brought down to Sheol, or Sheol is the place of the dead, into the deepest regions of the pit. And so it's interesting. Luke 10:18 actually confirms that this is Satan and riffs off of Isaiah 14. It says, Jesus told them, I saw Satan fall from heaven like a flash of lightning. And so he confirms there that Lucifer fell as a fallen angel. And also in Isaiah, it says Satan will be cast into the deepest regions of the pit. And I'll talk about that in a little bit. And so actually, when we have this idea, this common misconception is that Satan rules over hell. And that's completely false, because in the Bible, Satan had dominion over the earth after Adam fell, not hell. And so Satan doesn't rule hell. Satan actually ruled the earth. And, doesn't that help describe things or help make sense of things? Humans were given dominion over animals in the earth in Genesis 1:26-28. But then Satan, after his act against Adam and Eve, took that dominion instead. And it doesn't specifically say that, but we can gather it from a lot of different verses. Like in 2 Corinthians 4:4, it says, Satan, who is the god of this world, has blinded the minds of those who don't believe. And so Satan, the god of this world, he runs the world. And granted, that was temporary, and you'll see why. And then 1 John 5:19, we know that we are children of God and that the whole world is under the control of the evil one. So there again, the whole world is under the control of Satan. So he obviously rules the world at one point. And then John 12:31, the time for judging this world has come when Satan, the ruler of this world, will be cast out. So there it's actually specifically said that Satan rules the world, and so that means he has dominion. And I'll show you how that's temporary too. But Ephesians 2:2, you were following the ways of this world, influenced by this present age in accordance with the prince of the power of the air, Satan, the spirit who is at work in the disobedient, the unbelieving who fight against the purposes of God. And so there, Satan is called the prince of power. So there again, it implies that he has dominion. And that's often why also too the popular conception that he is the prince of darkness. And then John 16:11 also says, because the ruler of this world, Satan, has been judged and condemned. And so Satan actually did run the world at one point. And then John 14:30, I will not speak with you as much longer, for the ruler of this world, Satan, is coming, and he has no claim on me. And so the ongoing theme in the Bible is that Jesus would return to defeat Satan and then gain dominion over the earth and give it back to humanity. And it's not something that's really talked about a lot in Christian circles, but it's definitely a theme that you see. Like the ongoing theme is that humans lost dominion over the earth, but Satan gained dominion. But then Jesus would return, defeat Satan, and give that dominion back to humans. And so just a couple comments came through too. Tanya said, still think the forbidden fruit was the Cochus illicus, meaning forbidden fruit or berry. Kermes illicus, Tola Hebrew, and crimson or scarlet worm. Yeah, there's a lot of different theories about what the forbidden fruit actually was. It could be that it was a pomegranate. I've heard that, or an apple. That was sort of the traditional understanding. I don't know if that holds up to scrutiny, but yeah, good question. And then Tanya also said Satan is hubris, pride. That's so true. Very true. Yep. Another characteristic. And so I want to talk about too, we're going to jump in what's known as the proto-evangelium. The proto-evangelium shows us that God always had the plan of salvation in mind and informed us of his plan as soon as sin entered the world. So this is really interesting, actually. Like when people talk about what was the earliest mention of Jesus, and there's the source, by the way, for the proto-evangelium. Genesis 3:14-15 is the earliest time that Jesus is actually mentioned, because it says, then it's not explicit, but it's pretty obvious. It says, then the Lord God said to the serpent, because you have done this, You are cursed more than any livestock and more than any wild animal. You will move on your belly and eat dust all the days of your life. And so God is talking to the serpent, or in Christian understanding, Satan. And he said, I will put hostility between you, the serpent, and the woman, and between your seed and her seed. So, meaning there's going to be hostility between humans and snakes, or humans, or Satan and the seed of the woman. And the seed of the woman of Eve is Jesus, because it says here, he will strike your head and you will strike his heel, meaning that the serpent will strike Jesus's heel. That was with the crucifixion. And then he will strike your head, meaning Jesus will strike Satan's head and eventually defeat him. And so that is something that's mentioned in the Bible a lot, is this ongoing hostility between Satan and Jesus. And so like in 1 John 3:8, it says, he who commits sin is from Satan, because Satan is a sinner from the beginning. The Son of God appeared for this reason, to destroy the works of Satan. And so it makes this very clear distinction that the works of Satan and the works of Jesus are very different from each other. Actually, adversarial. Romans 16:20, and God, our source of peace, will soon crush Satan under your feet. The grace of our Lord Jesus be with you. And so there it predicts that God, or Jesus, the source of peace, will then crush Satan under his feet. And then Colossians 1:13, he has saved us from the power of darkness and brought us into the kingdom of his beloved Son. And so there, the kingdom of God, or the kingdom of Jesus, is different from the power of darkness, which is Satan's kingdom. Acts 26:18, to open their eyes so that they may turn from darkness to light and from the power of Satan to God. And so Satan is contrasted as the world of darkness, or the prince of darkness, to the power of light, which is God, or Jesus. And Matthew 13:19, when anyone hears the word of the kingdom regarding salvation and does not understand and grasp it, the evil one comes and snatches away what was sown in his heart. And so there's also this battle between souls here that we see too, where Jesus is trying to gain people for his kingdom, and Satan is trying to pull them back and say, no, they belong to my kingdom. And then Ephesians 6:12, also interpretable, but very, very obvious. It says, we are not fighting against humans. We are fighting against forces and authorities and against rulers of darkness and powers in the spiritual world. And then Acts 10:38, it says, and you know that God anointed Jesus of Nazareth with the Holy Spirit and with power. Then Jesus went around doing good and healing all who were oppressed by the devil, for God was with him. And this is another one I wanted to focus on too, is that sometimes Satan has control over people through, he oppresses them through disease, where we see it says Jesus went around doing good and healing all who were oppressed by the devil, meaning that Satan had people oppressed by their diseases. And then 1 John 3:10, so now we can tell who are children of God and who are children of the devil. Anyone who does not live righteously and does not love other believers does not belong to God. And so God strictly states that you have to love other believers, and live righteously, and that will be an identification of God. Whereas someone, in contrast, who is not living righteously and does not love other believers does not belong to God, or is of Satan. And then I want to talk about too, what does Satan do with his dominion? So if Satan had dominion over the earth, now this is something, a lot of people would say, oh, the idea of Satan is sort of antiquated and, sort of mythological. And so, why does anybody believe that today? And if you look at the state of the world, actually, I have no problem believing that Satan had control over the world, or has some sort of influence over the world, especially when you look at factory farming. Who doesn't look at that and think that is absolutely the work of Satan? And that's not something that's, I think, a far reach, or, something that's delusional. Ephesians 6:11, it says, like, what does Satan do with his dominion? It says, put on the full armor of God so that you may take your stand against the devil's schemes. And then 2 Corinthians 2:11, I have done this so that we may not be taken advantage of by Satan, for we are not ignorant of his schemes. And so Satan has schemes, and so what are Satan's schemes? It says in Ephesians 4:27, and do not give the devil an opportunity to lead you into sin by holding a grudge, or nurturing anger, or harboring resentment, or cultivating bitterness. So all of these are the works of Satan, or this is the things that he tries to encourage. 1 Timothy 5:15, for I am afraid that some of them have already gone astray and now follow Satan. So there again, Satan tries to get people to follow him. 2 Timothy 2:26, and that they will come to their senses and escape from the trap of the devil, who has taken them captive to do his will. And so there, Satan is described as taking people captive to do his will. First Thessalonians 2:18, we wanted very much to come to you. I and Paul tried again and again, but Satan prevented us. And so Satan prevented Paul from evangelizing. That's another thing that Satan has power or is doing actively. John 13:2, it was during supper when the devil had already put the thought of betraying Jesus into the heart of Judas Iscariot, Simon's son. And so there's another thing that Satan does too, is he's able to influence people. It was during supper when Satan had put the idea of betraying Jesus into the heart of Judas. So that's something that's important to recognize too, is that he influences people to do bad things. Well, I guess you could argue too that was in the long run something good, because then Jesus was able to, God used it for good, I guess you could say. Um, and then John 13:27, when Judas had eaten the bread, Satan entered into him, and Jesus told him, hurry and do what you're going to do. And so that idea is that Satan actually possesses people to do bad things. And so, like, Judas was possessed by Satan when he betrayed Jesus, is the indication there. And it also says in Luke 22:3, then Satan entered into Judas Iscariot, who was one of the 12 disciples. So Judas was actually possessed by Satan. In 2 Thessalonians 2:9, it says, the coming of the Antichrist, or the lawless one, is through the activity of Satan. With great power, all kinds of counterfeit miracles and deceptive signs. And so then also something I'll discuss next week is that Satan will raise the Antichrist. Or I'm sorry, I should say did raise the Antichrist, but there's more on that. Hebrews 2:14-15, it says, for because the children shared together in flesh and blood, he also shared in these things in the same form, so that by his death he would destroy the one who had held the authority of death, who is Satan, and he would free those by the fear of death. All their lives were subjected to bondage. And so that's another thing too, is that Satan has had power over death. And this source sums it up well. It says the reference to Satan's power of death is doubtless an allusion to the tempter's role in the fall of humanity at the beginning of time. Death reigns as a result of sin, Romans 5:12. Since the devil introduced sin, he is characterized as the murderer of the human family, and also animals too. They forgot to mention that. But John 8:44, Satan is considered a murderer because he was the one that brought death into the world. And there's the source for that too. So that's important to understand too, is that the conclusion is Satan's dominion has brought death. And that's something that's very different from God's kingdom to Satan's kingdom. Like in Luke 13:11, it also says he saw a woman who had been crippled by an evil spirit. She had been bent double for 18 years and was unable to stand up straight. And 13:16, this dear woman, a daughter of Abraham, had been held in bondage by Satan for 18 years. So that's another thing that Satan does too, is that he holds people in bondage through disease. And again, too, I don't want to make it out like, I should have added this to the disclaimer, but I don't want to make it out like spiritual forces are all, the indication of disease. Sometimes diseases just happen because of, we live in a fallen world, because, infections, because, just things are not the way that they're supposed to be from a spiritual perspective. It doesn't always mean that, if you're sick, you're being attacked by Satan or anything like that. I don't mean to imply that, but it is from a biblical perspective, it is a factor, is that, when people are sick or they're oppressed by disease, that's an indication that Satan has sort of worked on them, and probably not anything to their fault a lot of times. In Luke 13:16, it says, this dear woman, a daughter of Abraham, has been held in bondage by Satan for 18 years. And so there she was unable to stand up straight. But I think also, too, it could mean that they're influenced by Satan because Satan brought disease into the world through the fall. And so that might also be what the indication is, too, is that because of Satan, we have disease. Whereas, if we never would have fell, we would have never had disease. And so they're the responsibility of Satan. And then 1 Timothy 3:7, he must also have a good reputation with outsiders so that he will not fall into disgrace and into the devil's trap. And so a lot of times Satan influences people with bad reputations, and then they fall into disgrace, and then Satan sort of has them do his will. Jude 1:9, it says also, but even the archangel Michael, when he was disputing with the devil, Satan, and arguing about the body of Moses, did not dare bring an abusive condemnation against him, but simply said, the Lord rebuke you. And so there, Satan was disputing with the archangel Michael, is what Jude describes. So he argues with people, apparently. And then also 1 Corinthians 7:5, it says, then come together again so that Satan will not tempt you because of your lack of self-control. And so that's another part of what Satan does, is he tempts people. Like in Mark 1:12-13, a very famous example, The Spirit then compelled Jesus to go into the wilderness where he was tempted by Satan for 40 days. And then a longer version of it is described in Matthew 4 1 to 11. It says, Then Jesus was led by the Spirit into the wilderness to be tempted there by the devil. For 40 days and 40 nights he fasted and became very hungry. During that time, the devil came and said to him, If you are the Son of God, tell these stones to become loaves of bread. But Jesus told him, No, the scriptures say people do not live by bread alone, but for every word that comes from the mouth of God. Then the devil took him to the holy city, Jerusalem, to the highest point of the temple, and said, If you are the Son of God, jump off. For the scriptures say he will order his angels to protect you, and they will hold you up with their hands, so you won't even hurt your foot on a stone. Jesus responded, The scriptures also say you must not test the Lord your God. Next, the devil took him to the peak of a very high mountain and showed him all the kingdoms of the world and their glory. I will give it all to you, he said, if you will kneel down and worship me. Get out of here, Satan, Jesus told him, for the scriptures say you must worship the Lord your God and serve only him. Then the devil went away and angels came and took care of Jesus. And so that's an important understanding too, is that Satan tries to tempt people, and he tried to tempt Jesus. And also the temptation of Jesus in the wilderness by Satan account is basically repeated in Luke 4 1 to 13, if you want to look at that. And then also in 1 Thessalonians 3 5, it says, At last, when I could not wait any longer, I sent Timothy to find out about your faith. I hoped Satan had not tempted you and made all our work useless. And so there again is that temptation that we see from Satan. Revelation 3 9, Look, I will force those who belong to Satan's synagogue, those liars who say they are Jews but are not, to come and bow down at your feet. And so there, Satan had some sort of control over a synagogue. And then Revelation 2 9 to 10, I know about your suffering and your poverty. I know the blasphemy of those opposing you. They say they are Jews, but they are not, because their synagogue belongs to Satan. And so they're Jewish believers were influenced by Satan, is what it reads. Do not be afraid of what you are about to suffer. I tell you, the devil will put some of you in prison to test you, and you will suffer persecution for 10 days. And so there, Satan is testing people in prison. And Revelation 2:13, it says, I know where you live, there where Satan has his throne. Antipas, my faithful witness, is killed there where Satan lives. And so what that was Satan actually is described as having a throne and living in the city of Pergamum, which was in what we would call modern day Turkey. So that was what was considered Satan's throne in his homeland, apparently. And then Acts 5:3, it says, Then Peter said, Ananias, why have you let Satan fill your heart? You lied to the Holy Spirit and you kept some of the money for yourself. And so there, Satan is described as filling someone's heart because they lied. And so lying is usually always associated with Satan. Zechariah 3 1 to 2, Then the angel showed me Jeshua, the high priest, standing before the angel of the Lord. The accuser, Satan, was there at the angel's right hand, making accusations against Jeshua. And so there, Satan is called the accuser. And the Lord said to Satan, I, the Lord, reject your accusations, Satan. Yes, the Lord who has chosen Jerusalem rebukes you. And so there, Satan is called an accuser. And then Luke 22:31, it says, Simon, Simon, listen, Satan has received permission to test all of you, to separate the good from the bad, as a farmer separates the wheat from the chaff. And so there, Satan is described as testing the apostles. Peter was informed of this. And then let me just go to the comments too. It says, interesting how eating food and Satan have been associated since the beginning of time, yet modern day carnists don't see it at all. That's so true. That's so very true. Yeah, thank you, Tanya. And then we're coming towards the end, but I just wanted to highlight a little bit more of what Satan does. So like Job 1 6 to 13, it says, One day the members, this is a very early description of Satan. This is in the Old Testament. One day the members of the heavenly court came to present themselves before the Lord, and the accuser, Satan, came with them. Where have you come from? The Lord asked Satan. Satan answered the Lord, I have been patrolling the earth, watching everything that's going on. Then the Lord asked Satan, Have you noticed my servant Job? He is the finest man in all the earth. He is blameless, a man of complete integrity. He fears God and stays away from evil. Satan replied to the Lord, Yes, but Job has good reason to fear God. You have always put a wall of protection around him in his home and his property. You have made him prosper in everything he does. Look how rich he is. But reach out and take away everything he has, and he will surely curse you to your face. All right, you may test him, the Lord said to Satan. And so there again, Satan is testing Job. Do whatever you want with everything he possesses, but don't harm him physically. So Satan left the Lord's presence. And then Job 2, 1-7. One day the members of the heavenly court came again to present themselves before the Lord, and the accuser, Satan, came with them. Where have you come from? The Lord asked Satan. And Satan answered the Lord, I have been patrolling the earth, watching everything that's going on. Then the Lord asked Satan, have you noticed my servant Job? And so this is basically a repeat, but it's also Job 2. It's a little bit different. He is the finest man in all the earth. He is blameless, a man of complete integrity. He fears God and stays away from evil, and he has maintained his integrity, even though you have urged him to harm him without, or you've urged me to harm him without cause. Satan replied to the Lord, skin for skin, a man will give up everything he has to save his life, but reach out and take away his health, and he will surely curse you to your face. All right, do with him as you please, the Lord said to Satan, but spare his life. So Satan left the Lord's presence, and he struck Job with terrible boils from head to foot. And so there again, Satan is the cause of someone's disease, it looks like. And again, I'm not saying that's always the case, but just what the Bible says. And then I think the final portion of this is, where is Satan now? And a lot of that depends on eschatology. And eschatology is the study of the end times, or like what's going to happen. And so what's described as happening to Satan, it says Revelation 21-3. Then I saw an angel coming down from heaven with the key to the bottomless pit and a heavy chain in his hand. He seized the dragon, that old serpent who is the devil, Satan, and bound him in chains for 1,000 years. The angel threw him into the bottomless pit, which he then shut and locked, so Satan could not deceive the nations anymore until the 1,000 years were finished. Afterward, he must be released for a little while. And so there, it says that Satan will be bound in chains. And so really the question is, when does that happen? And, a lot of what's known as premillennial dispensationalists will say that that's going to happen in the future. I take an opposite approach. I think the accurate understanding is a postmillennial or amillennial approach. And I'll talk about all of this, in future teachings. But the dramatic imagery that John employs in Revelation 21-3 teaches that Satan has been bound so that he should not deceive the nations any longer. This allows those who are spiritually resurrected believers to reign with him in his kingdom. Despite popular misunderstandings of this passage, this vision speaks of realities already established in Christ's first coming. And so this is Kenneth Gentry, who's one of my favorite writers that talks about biblical stuff. But he's a theologian, but he understands Revelation 21-3 is already having happened, and so Satan is already bound in chains, is what he says. And he says, first, Christ informs us that he has already bound Satan. He said, if I cast out demons by the Spirit of God, then the kingdom of God has come upon you. Or how can anyone enter the strong man's house and carry off his property unless he first binds the strong man? Then he will plunder his house. And so what Jesus is saying is that he's bound Satan, and he is now plundering his house, which means that Jesus has an influence over the world, over Satan. Whatever else he might think, Christ himself declares he has bound this strong one during his earthly ministry so that he may spoil Satan's kingdom while establishing his own. And so Jesus has established his kingdom in opposition to Satan, and that's something that's going to go on until the end of time. And so he has bound him already. And Gentry also states, fourth, we must note that Satan's binding does not totally incapacitate him. Rather, his binding is for an expressly declared purpose, that he should not deceive the nations any longer. In Revelation 20:3. This speaks of the plundering of his house, Matthew 12:29. Satan is bound by the first century coming of Christ's kingdom so that he may not continue to deceive and dominate the nations any longer. But now the whole world is open to release from Satan's absolute dominion because of having been bound by Christ. The Great Commission, therefore, confidently sends us out to make disciples of all nations, in Matthew 28:19, who previously were totally subject to Satan and without hope. And so that's an important understanding, too, is that Christ came in the first century and established his own kingdom, and then now Satan is bound. And, and it says Satan is going to be bound for 1,000 years, and we'll talk about that. The conclusion we can make is Satan is bound and chained in a pit right now. So like Isaiah 14, it says you will be taken down into the pit. That was confirmed by Revelation when it said Satan is bound and chained in a pit right now, because he's bound for 1,000 years. And a lot of people say, like, well, he's only bound for 1,000 years, and it's been 2,000 years since Christ came. But 1,000 years is not always literal, and like a lot of times it just means a long number. It means just a long time. Like Psalm 50:10-11, it says, God says, "I own the cattle on 1,000 hills," and so the 1,000 hills, that doesn't mean that it's just 1,000 hills. That doesn't mean that God just counts 1,000 hills and says, okay, these are mine, and then this is everybody else's. It means just all the hills. And so 1,000 often means in biblical language just a lot, or an undefined number, but it's a long time. But then, you might ask, well, Satan is bound and chained, but then what's going to happen to him later on? And the Bible's pretty explicit about this, about what is Satan's ultimate fate. And so, like Genesis 3:15, it was actually predicted that this would happen. Like I said, it says, "And I will cause hostility between you and the woman, and between your offspring and her offspring. He will strike your head, and you will strike his heel." And so, this is the woman and um, Satan. Their ongoing battle between the human and the serpents of Satan. And so we see this too. You will strike his heel, meaning that Satan struck Jesus's heel with the crucifixion, or he injured him. But then Jesus will strike Satan's head, meaning he will ultimately defeat him. And this is actually said to happen later on. Now, from my perspective, this hasn't happened yet. Who knows when this will happen, whenever Christ returns. But in Revelation 27-10, it says, "When the 1,000 years come to an end," meaning a long time, "Satan will be let out of his prison. He will go out to deceive the nations, called Gog and Magog. In every corner of the earth, he will gather them together for battle. A mighty army as numberless as sand along the seashore. And I saw them as they went up to the broad plain of the earth and surrounded God's people in the beloved city." And so Satan will rule the earth for a little while. And it says, "But fire from heaven came down on the attacking armies and consumed them." And so that's Jesus coming back. And it says, "Then the devil who had deceived them was thrown into the fiery lake of burning sulfur, joining the beast and the false prophet. They will be tormented day and night forever and ever." And so that is what hell is, actually. We finally got to hell in the Bible, which is a fiery lake of burning sulfur. And then Satan, as well as his false prophet and antichrist, will be thrown there. It says they will be tormented day and night forever and ever. And so Satan will be cast into hell that will be his final estate. And then the new earth will be here, and everything will be restored back to righteousness. And it also says this in Matthew 25:41. It says, "Then the king will turn to those on the left and say, 'Away with you, you cursed ones, into the eternal fire prepared for the devil and his demons.'" And so the eternal fire is hell, and Satan and his demons or helpers will be thrown there at the end of time. And so the conclusion we can make is Satan does not rule hell. He actually will end up tortured there. And it says this actually on this source. It says, "Satan does not rule hell. Hell was created as a punishment for Satan and his demons." And that's true, actually. And there's actually a little bit of this is kind of I shouldn't say fun, but I thought it was interesting when I found this out. But everybody knows the famous passage. It actually has a little bit of a clue about where Satan goes. This was teased also in Isaiah 65:25. It says, this is a famous vegan passage. It says, "The wolf and the lamb will feed together, and the lion will eat straw like the ox. But as for the serpent, its food will be dust. They won't harm or destroy my entire holy mountain." And so there it describes, the animals and will become non-violent on the new earth. But it says, "But as for the serpent, its food will be dust." And I always thought that was interesting, because it's like, well, why are they eating hay? The other animals are eating hay or straw, and then the serpent is eating dust. And obviously, it's trying to convey this idea that snakes will be non-violent, but also it's a little bit of an illusion, because it's also discreetly and sort of disguisingly saying what will happen to Satan. So, like in Genesis 3:14, there's a link there. Isaiah 65:25 says, "The serpent's food will be dust." And then Genesis 3:14 says, "Then the Lord said to the serpent, because you have done this, cursed are you more than all the livestock and more than any animal of the field. On your belly you shall go, and dust you shall eat all the days of your life." And so when it says that the serpent will eat dust all the days of your life, we get this idea that, snakes are eating dust, or Satan is just eating dust, but that's not. It's a metaphor. And it's kind of like how today, for instance, there's that song "Another One Bites the Dust" by Queen, and that's about defeating someone. And there's also, like, if you watch like a NASCAR race or something like that, they'll say, "Oh, the opponent ate my dust," and it means that he defeated everybody in his path. And that's exactly what the Bible means by it too. Like Micah 7:17, it says, "They will lick the dust like a serpent. They will crawl from their strongholds like snakes. They will fear the Lord our God." And so that just means that they will lick the dust, meaning the snakes, or those in opposition to God, will lick the dust, meaning they will be defeated. And that's what Isaiah 65:25 means to say too, is that Satan will lick the dust, as in Satan will be defeated. And then it says also elsewhere in the Hebrew Bible, eating dust is an expression meaning a sign of total defeat. So a diet of dust is an expression used to describe total defeat. And so Isaiah 65:25, like I said, the serpent eating dust means that he will be defeated like he is in Revelation. And that was sort of a little hidden prophecy. And so Satan's dominion, there's a source for that too, by the way. But and then the final part of this, it says Satan's dominion meant death and suffering, which is obvious. Jesus won back dominion for humans and animals when he bound Satan. So, like in Hebrews 2:5, it says, and furthermore, it is not angels who will control the future world we are talking about. Hebrews 2:6-8 says, but there is a place where someone has testified, what is mankind that you were mindful of him, a son of man that you care for him? You made them a little lower than the angels. You crowned them with glory and honor and put everything under their feet. In putting everything under them, God left nothing that is not subject to them, yet at present we do not see everything subject to them. And so what he means by that is that Jesus established his kingdom in the first century, and then it grows and grows and grows, but it's not yet completely here yet. And so it's here but not yet, meaning that the kingdom has started and it's growing, but it's not quite finished yet. And so Jesus' kingdom is always growing until he comes back. And then that Hebrews 2:5, it says that dominion that he's discussing, it's talking about the future world or the new earth. And so Hebrews 2:5-8 places Psalm 8:4-8 on the new earth. And so that new earth dominion, which will be fully restored to humans and Jesus when he returns, it says, what is mankind that you are mindful of them? Human beings that you care for them. You have made them a little lower than the angels and crowned them with glory and honor. You made them rulers over the works of your hands. You put everything under their feet, all flocks and herds and the animals of the field, the birds in the sky and the fish in the sea, all that swim in the paths of the sea. And so what we can determine is that Jesus won back dominion from Satan, even though it is now an incomplete dominion. And so this is actually seen within Revelation 5:10. It says, you have made them to be a kingdom and priests to serve our God, and they will reign on the earth. And so Jesus made us, his believers, his kingdom and priests, and we will reign on the earth. And so that's describing, we do now as well, but not complete yet. We don't yet have complete dominion. And so what does Satan's dominion over the earth and animals look like? This is actually described in Genesis 6:11-13. Now the earth was corrupt in God's sight and was full of violence. God saw how corrupt the earth had become, for all of the people on earth had corrupted their ways. And God said to Noah, I have determined to make an end to all flesh, for the earth is filled with violence through them. Behold, I will destroy them with the earth. And so what we have here is that Satan's dominion is defined by violence. But then what does, again, I said Satan's dominion and God's dominion are always antagonistic to each other, are always the opposite. And so what does Christ's and our dominion over the earth look like? And this is actually described a couple times. So like in Isaiah 11:6-9, it says, wolves and sheep will live together in peace, and leopards will lie down with young goats. Calves and lion cubs will feed together, and little children will take care of them. Cows and bears will eat together, and their calves and cubs will lie down in peace. Lions will eat straw as cattle do. Even a baby will not be harmed if it plays near a poisonous snake. On Zion, God's sacred hill, there will be nothing harmful or evil. The land will be as full of the knowledge of the Lord as the seas are full of water. And so Jesus' dominion, as described in Isaiah 11:6-9, is that humans and animals will live together in peace and harmony. It'll be the complete opposite of Satan's dominion, which is about violence. And then Hosea 2:18, it says, in that day I will make a covenant for them with the beasts of the field, the birds in the sky, and the creatures that move along the ground. Bow and sword and battle I will abolish from the land, so that all may lie down in safety. And so what does Jesus' dominion look like? Like I said, Satan's dominion is all about violence and fear. Jesus' dominion and our dominion over animals, a godly dominion, should say that we all lie down in safety. And so it's the complete opposite of what Satan has in mind. And Tanya responded, heaven's timing is way different than the earth's timing. Exactly. Right. That's the 1,000 years portion. Absolutely. Yeah. Great job. Correct, Tanya. And so that concludes my presentation. By the way, I went a little bit over on this one. I talked a little much, but that's okay. But thank you all for tuning in. I really appreciate it. If anybody has any comments, feel free. I'm just going to close out in prayer. But Heavenly Father, thank you for allowing me to preach your word. And thank you for giving us your wisdom about Satan's kingdom versus your kingdom. And help us to search out your kingdom for your righteousness and also the blessings of what we give to the animals through that, which is what is described in Isaiah 11, the peace and harmony that we can find through you and give to animals as a result of our dominion and your ideas of dominion. Help us to lead us away from Satan's dominion, which is filled with violence, and help us to embrace your ways and your dominion, which is filled with peace. And so that's all for my presentation. I wish everybody a great week, and thank you so much for attending. And recording of this will be available on Tuesday. And then, I had one other comment come through. Tanya said, "Thank you. You're very welcome. Very welcome." That, like I said, thank you guys for showing up and participating, and going along with me as I read through this. And so, you guys have a great weekend. God bless, and I'll see you next week here. Next week's teaching is actually going to be about who is the Antichrist, and so I think a lot of people will find that one interesting too. And be sure to tune into that. But everybody have a great week, and I'll see you next Sunday.